Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network, all NASCAR, all the time, as we preview the upcoming race this weekend from Nashville, recap what we learned or maybe didn't learn from the elongated rain race at New Hampshire, and of course cover some betting basics on this very program. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional bettor and NASCAR analyst Chris Werme. And Wormser, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get unlucky. And last weekend, my friend, the gambling gods and Mother Nature smiled kindly upon us. Christopher Bell to victory lane in a race that took about 6 hours, but it was the wet weather tires that allowed the 20 car to drive into victory lane.
I want to give every keyboard warrior credit, including Dale Jr., because during this rain delay, which was clearly coming, NASCAR was getting crucified. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is tweeting, and I don't know if you know this or not, but in the sport of NASCAR, Dale Earnhardt Jr. is very important.
I've never heard that name, so I'm actually going to Google it while you continue to tell the
Google
story.
that, maybe Google his dad and see if they have any NASCAR history that might be worthy of paying attention when they speak up. He was commenting about how there were no umbrellas.
Apparently, they own car dealerships in your old stomping grounds in Arizona, unbeknownst to me. So that's actually the first thing that popped up. But go ahead,
really?
Continue your story.
Well, I don't think that Dale's very concerned with SEO, whereas I feel like maybe car dealerships are. However,
True.
I don't want to say that keyboard warriors got them to restart this race. But
you're not saying they didn't get them to restart this race. I'm not saying they
didn't. That's exactly right. For NASCAR to actually come out and have a NASCAR spokesperson comment as to what the rain tires are actually used for means that they felt a little bit of heat. And for us to sit back and say that NASCAR doesn't pay attention to social media and X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it, we'd be lying to ourselves. They actually pay attention. They care greatly. And it was almost like they were baited to start this race again. And I didn't think it was going to happen, but all of a sudden Dale tweeted, heck, maybe they'll just get this thing going after the showers roll through. And sure as shit, they went green, and I was shocked. I was pretty much happy with winning both matchups and losing it outright.
If not, then when? To try and roll out the wet weather tires, which we've been informed multiple times by NASCAR are not designed to drive in a downpour by any stretch. Correct. Where visibility can be compromised. There are no mud flaps. There are no windshield wipers on the short track program, but definitely a unique way to spend a Sunday afternoon. When we talked about this race at around this time last week, we said, oh yeah, it's one of the shorter races of the season. Yeah. That was the first NASCAR race you happen to tune into. Buckle up, 6.5 hours later, you may as well have been watching the 24 hours of Le Mans. But we'll get into some of the things that we learned in that race and some of the lessons that we can apply. For those folks who are tuning into the Stay Green podcast for the first time, 3 stages. Stage 1, all about what we learned and what we can apply going forward. Stage 2, a preview of the upcoming weekend's race. This week, it'll take us to Nashville for a 1.3-mile concrete oval. And stage 3, some betting basics as we peel back the curtain and try and make all of you guys and girls better, sharper NASCAR bettors. So you mentioned Christopher Bell. You were bullish on him coming in. You said you even went as far as saying you thought the 20 car was undervalued, which is rare for you to say in regards to a favorite. Christopher Bell goes out there, gets seat time in the Xfinity race, dusts the field, starts the race towards the front on the Cup side, had a good car, got shuffled to the back. During the rain delay, we're not sure if Christopher Bell is going to have a chance. They put the wet weather tires on. And Christopher Bell, leaning into his dirt background, is the only thing that I can attribute to. Looking for a line, keeping those tires cool. immediately picks up positions, drives to the front, and is able to keep a number of other talented drivers at bay during what felt like 37 late race restarts.
Oh.
So kudos to Christopher Bell. It's a driver that you've been high on for his overall pedigree in the past. We've questioned his level of consistency, but for the first time all season, after us talking about the odds to win the championship, he's actually moved to the championship favorite at some prominent books out here in the desert. And you can understand, given how well he's raced in the playoffs in the past and what it could mean if he's one of the 4 drivers that gets to Phoenix. Overall, what was your takeaway from that race at New Hampshire? One that, if you believe the tea leaves and what, Jordan Bianchi and some of the folks at The Athletic are reporting, is going to carry a lot more weight as a racetrack, given its potential placement on the schedule next season.
I think you kind of have to separate this race almost into 3 segments. You have kind of the start of the race. We didn't have a lot of practice. So this was the first time the cars were on the track, all of them together for any consistent amount of time. And you kind of just have to see what unfolds. I would say, I know I tweeted shortly after, I would say 20 or 30 laps into the race, give them an adjustment. This is the first time they've actually had to make an adjustment, or they've seen their car run more than 10 laps. So you kind of look at kind of the first half of the race, and there were some guys that were clearly off, and, Brad Keselowski and RFK. Brad
could have made 4 or 5 adjustments, and I still don't think it was going to help the 6 car.
Yeah, and that's just lack of practice. And
look, by the way, as a Yankees fan, if you're going to drive a Red Sox car, I have no problem seeing you shuffle to the bottom of the standings. So
yeah, absolutely,
I'm more than happy to see that unfold.
Yeah, and so the early part of the race, you saw Chase Elliott get out to like a 3.5 or 4 almost a 4-second lead. Chris Bell on the started outside of row 2, even though he started 4th outside of row 2. Kind of, is grandfathered into second place with the way that the restarts were working, and was able to slowly reel Chase in. Clearly, over the long run, had a dominant race car up until the 19 got to him. We'll kind of save that for later. And then you kind of look at the middle of the race where that's, the meat and potatoes. You're going to have green flag pit stops. You had pit stops under caution. And you saw the cream rise to the top. Who's good on the short run and long run? It was quite clear that the outside lane was the dominant lane. I think everyone kind of knew that going in. But there were also guys that could hold their position on the bottom, which was really important because you could pick up 1, 2, maybe even 3 rows by taking the inside. If you're able to make it stick and maybe you pick up a spot, you're able to pass 4 or 5 cars in a 2 or 3 lap window because you inherit, I don't know, you're gonna sacrifice the inside, but you might start 2 or 3 rows ahead. That's going to be passing a lot of cars as long as you can make it stick. And then you had the rain, and I think it was a great learning opportunity just to see how these teams perform and how NASCAR reacts to the rain. This was a dictatorship. It was, you are putting wets on. I'm okay with that. By the way, I'm okay with anything, but you do have to understand that going in, that if in the future, if rain is an issue, NASCAR is going to tell them what tires to put on, most likely not competitive pit stops. So go ahead and throw that away from your handicapping. If you think that a certain guy or a certain driver is going to struggle based on their pit stall and there could be some rain, you go ahead and take that out of your handicapping, because non-competitive pit stops, and also they determined who was putting on tires and when. The other thing we saw was they allowed teams to fill the cars with fuel. Now, the cars that went out there and took that gamble, knowing that the rain was going to come, were short on fuel, and they would have had to have green flag stops. But NASCAR with no non-competitive stops, like, are you going to make these cars pit under green? A little bit of confusion. So I still think my overall takeaway will be that I think track history matters at Loudon, for one. Number 2, if we do find ourselves in a rain race, NASCAR is going to really be in control of whether teams take wets or slicks. We have not seen this let them choose or let them decide. I'd like to see it, and we might eventually get there, but we can't watch this race and say, yep, that's what's going to happen in the future. And then finally, gosh, I would say dirt track guys do a really good job of finding the fastest line. We saw Chase Briscoe, who was terrible dry, move his way up in the wets. We saw, now I know that Josh Berry's not particularly a dirt track guy, but he's a short track guy, also found speed in the rain tires. We saw that at Richmond when we started on rain tires earlier this year. And we saw Chris Bell go from 9th to 1st in what seemed like 10 seconds. I mean, it was 2 restarts and he was to the front. I'm not saying that that's automatically going to happen every time you strap on rain tires. But if Chris Bell is going to be good at a track, or a particular dirt track driver or someone with that pedigree finds himself on rain tires, they just find the fastest line and they're going to get there first. And they're not afraid to maybe get loose or put themselves in an awkward position in order to move forward. So that's kind of my takeaway. It was a very difficult race. I think, I'm not sure I got a lot right. We cashed some tickets, but man, if I'm looking back, I'm thinking my lucky stars that this thing went green. Well, it went back green, and we were able to see Chris Bell get the lead and then never lose it again.
Yeah, some misadventures as well for playoff drivers or those that have playoff aspirations. And Joey Logano, the perfect microcosm of Kyle Busch's entire season. Him losing control of his car under yellow. Part of me wanted to go, maybe this is what Kyle wanted. He just wanted to get the hell out of New Hampshire. That was my thought. He went, the hell with it. I'm just going to drive my car into the wall. And now if Kyle was looking to try and accomplish a greater purpose, we saw that RCR fires their director of competition effective immediately in Andy Petrie. So clearly all is not well welcome in North Carolina for the way the 3-car and the 8-car are running. But Joey Logano and Kyle Busch, still plenty of work to do. Kyle Busch more so if he's going to not only keep his 19-season winning streak alive, but be able to find himself amongst the 16 playoff drivers. And we'll talk plenty about those guys, maybe not necessarily today, but as we get deeper into the campaign, as they look to identify some opportunity. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I am Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And for you fans of big-time college football, first episode of our Power 4 conference preview series highlighting the ACC dropped on Wednesday this week. Encourage you folks to tune in. 2.5 hours of listening content there at your disposal, all time stamped and readily available. Yes, actually a little over 2.5 hours for us to do that. So it's longer than most major motion pictures, something that would make Daniel Day-Lewis very proud in terms of its longevity. But that's the joy of having 2 months until the college football season starts. You can listen one team at a time. But all right, Stage 2 Wormser preview of Nashville. We mentioned the track type at the top of the show. It is a 1.33 mile concrete track with 14 degrees of banking. It's hosted 3 NASCAR Cup Series races previously, 9 degrees of banking on the front straightaway, 6 degrees on the back. It is the largest concrete-only track in NASCAR. And when we look at Dover, I know a lot of people default to that as a potential track comp, but also some elements of intermediate tracks and 1.5 miles. When you begin to profile what tracks will feed into how you're looking at drivers this weekend, how do you go about that particular process?
Yeah, I guess I kind of treat this like a flat Dover, so there's no direct track comp. I do think Dover is important. If you look back, I do think that there's a very high correlation between just running well on concrete at Dover does transfer quite nicely to Nashville. However, not the same speed at all, and longer, but races more like a short track than Dover does. I think that Dover races almost like a 1.5 mile track. You're in the corner for a long time. You're back to the gas. You're not a lot of off throttle time. Whereas Nashville, you have a little bit more of that because there's not as much banking. It really is kind of a one of one, and that's becoming the norm week in and week out as we have these discussions, is the nuances of these tracks, instead of kind of grouping them together like just a cookie cutter 1.5 mile track. We used to throw those all together, but because the cars are so similar, you really have to look at every track as like its own thing because the cars are so close. So the edge that someone might have on at say a place like Texas is not going to be similar to a place like Charlotte. And I would consider Darlington, I know it's not quite a 1.5 mile track, but it's very races very similarly to that. It's still very different than a place like Homestead, even though we see a lot of tire wear. So Yes, I would say Dover is the closest comp, but it's just a hint of Dover only because of the surface, and I think a lot of that has to do with the setup. Whereas, right now you're going to have to still take into consideration how teams are running, and we have to take a look at the tire and kind of figure out where there's some value, because right now, we see guys like Chris Bell have a lot of speed week in and week out. Is that going to transfer to a place like Nashville, where he hasn't had a tremendous amount of success relative to a few of the tracks that we've seen recently?
No, and you mentioned Christopher Bell, who did also win at Charlotte the last time we were at a 1.5 mile track. So you do wonder if the 20 will be able to parlay some of that momentum. And like we've done for all of these race previews throughout the course of the season, when we look at drivers, we kind of put them in different buckets: tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. Now, as far as tier 1 is concerned, stop me if you've heard this before, Kyle Larson is your pre-week race favorite. And when we look at Kyle Larson in terms of his next-gen numbers in Nashville, 3rd best average finish, 4th in 2022, 5th in 2023, 7th best total speed ranking, 5th best drive rating, 6th best average running position. I don't think we have to deep dive Kyle Larson. Newsflash, the 5 car will be good. He will qualify well and have a chance to be in contention, assuming he doesn't take himself out of it. Denny Hamlin is interesting because this is a price we don't see often on Denny at tracks of this particular length. We saw his number open at 8-1 in some prominent books. We're now looking at more or less 6-1 painted across the board. And Denny comes in riding the first cold spell of the season. 3 straight finishes, 24th or worse. For those folks who listen to Action Detrimental, he was pretty much honest and said, look, I couldn't figure it out in the rain tires to save my life.
Yeah,
he said it couldn't have been worse if I put the slicks on. Denny probably would have gone careening into the wall if that was the case, and talked a little bit about the track discoloration and how tough it may be to figure those things out. But when you look at Denny overall, I mean, the 43 laps he led at New Hampshire were the first laps he's led in 5 races. However, Nashville Werme has been a bit of a playground, and the numbers don't lie in terms of what the 11 car has done, especially in the next gen era. Yeah,
I think, he's definitely coming off some rough finishes. And, the law of averages will support him running well. And he also has a history here. Take a look at who won at Dover. Oh, by the way, Denny Hamlin. And he's had a lot of fast laps. Even if you go back to 2022 when Chase Elliott won, he started on the pole. He had 68 fastest laps. He had the best driver rating. I anticipate Denny Hamlin to be very strong this week. I think that this was where books were maybe a little off when they opened him at that 8-1. I think some guys were able to pick that off. I like that number at 8. The other thing, too, is it's going to be hot and slick. They're going to practice, hopefully. So far, the weather looks good. They'll be practicing on Saturday. It's supposed to be 93 degrees. That's going to be hot. And then Sunday, chance of thunderstorms, but they're going to be quick whenever you have that hot, humid air. Hopefully, they roll in and roll out. Again, we won't have to deal with the same situation in Loudon. Loudon doesn't have lights. Nashville does have lights. And then at Nashville last year, when it was hot and slick, Denny was out there leading laps. And then as the track started to cool, you started to see the 19, you started to see the 1 make up some ground on Denny Hamlin. I expect him to qualify well. His average starting spot is 4.5.
That's pretty good.
He started on the pole here. I think Denny's going to be very strong. And if you're able to, anything over 6-1, I think does warrant a little bit of a play. There is some 6.5 out there I've seen. So anything over 6, I do think is worth a nibble. I expect Denny to be good. He did not call his shot on Actions Detrimental, but they wanted him to. And he said, I'm not going to say what you guys want me to say, but he plans on running well. And a confident Denny is tough to pass, and he's definitely tough to beat.
When we look at some of the other Tier 1 drivers, we mentioned Christopher Bell a little bit early. He's been good at Nashville. I wouldn't call this one of his truly elite tracks, but he is riding a little bit of momentum. Chase Elliott, you highlighted in a very similar price range. Best average finish in the Cup Series, 4th best total speed ranking, 4th best driver rating, 4th best average finish. The stat that blew me away, Worm, the 18th last weekend at New Hampshire was his worst finish in a race since coming home 19th at Phoenix way back when early in the season. Speaks to the level of consistency we've seen from the 9, even if he hasn't really offered much race-winning speed on a week-in, week-out basis. And then there's your beloved Martin Truex Jr., who has upside of 9-1. His price was as high as 10. I'm seeing some 7.5s as well. The finishes haven't exactly been there for the 19, but he has been good in Nashville, 7th in terms of average finish. But the underlying metrics in total speed, driver rating, and average running position. Much better than that. And he has stage points in all 4 next-gen stages, including winning both stage 1 and 2 in 2022. And then a man who comes to his home track, or at least what Trackhouse calls their home track, Ross Chastain. We talk about current form. There isn't much in the way of current form for the one car, just 1 top 5 over his last 12 races, still searching for his first podium finish of 2024. But at Nashville, he has been very good. 5th in 22, 1st in 23, and top 3 in a lot of other key metrics. So when we look at some of those other drivers in the single digits, any stand out to you more than others?
I think that right now there's a lot of chase love, and I don't know that I agree with it. I think if you're a 9-1 car, or you're priced there, you look at Denny Hamlin, Chris Bell, and Chase Elliott kind of opened up in that 8-1, 9-1 range. Who's past cars? You could say Chris Bell and Denny Hamlin have. I don't think you can say the same thing about Chase Elliott. He's done a great job of execution. Don't get me wrong. I think that this has done that. This whole team, when it comes to strategy, when it comes to just speed in their race car, when it comes to issues on pit road, they've done a great job of managing races, but they haven't gone out there and been the fastest car. And if you're going to be priced with other drivers that are the fastest car, you better bring something else to the table. And when you don't have speed, you can only execute so well until you get passed by a faster car. And I'm not saying run out and fade Chase Elliott, but I don't think there's any reason to rush to the window and punch a ticket at this point in the week. Very average last week, was able to get out to, a 3 or 4 second lead and then just get run down in a matter of 20 laps by
by the way, and I wanted to highlight that early, which I found interesting. I'm not sure if you caught the comment on the broadcast. Adam Stevens, the crew chief for the 20 of Christopher Bell, said early on that he realized that the 9 car was not going to have good long run speed and didn't worry at all about Chase racing out to that lead after starting the race on the pole. But go ahead.
That goes back to some of the SMT stuff that they can see. Like, well, he's probably wearing a lot of his stuff out, trying to get out to a lead in hopes that Chris Bell doesn't run him down, knowing that eventually the 20 was going to be there. So I'm not super high on Chase Elliott, especially when he's priced similarly to Martin Truex Jr., who's had a ton of speed at this track, led a lot of laps last year, ran solidly at Dover, has run very consistently at Dover in the past, has also very consistently here at Nashville. I was a second guesser of Martin Truex Jr. last week and almost bit me in the ass. I was saved by just a poor pit stop. If someone came to me and said that they wanted to bet Martin Truex Jr. at this 8, 9, 10-1, 10 is where he opened and quickly bet down, I would say, yeah, that's probably a good bet. I got no problem backing Martin Truex Jr. here. I question where his head was at last week. I no longer question that, because it doesn't matter where your head's at. If your car's really fast and you're good at a track, you could be thinking Arby's and it doesn't matter. You're going straight to the front. So I do think Martin Truex Jr. is going to be good. Ross Chastain, gosh, he's going to be my Truex this week. A guy that I think is overvalued. And here's why. Yes, he has a great history here. He won here last year. I wouldn't say dominating fashion, but he was certainly a top 3 car all day long, was able to make passes, especially in the long run. We do see a lot of green flag racing here. This is not a place where guys just tend to snap loose and hit the wall. If there are cautions, it's typically on a restart. Here's my hesitancy with Chastain. Again, we have not seen him fly to the front. We have not seen him pass a lot of race cars and, the one car is the fastest on track. We haven't said that often. The other thing, when you look back at track history, 2 of his best tracks are Dover, which would make sense because it's concrete, but also Darlington. And we saw him just stink up the show. Honestly, he embarrassed me at both of those tracks because I was heavy on him. I came on this very podcast and said, if you're not backing Ross Chastain, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. And he went out there and wasn't very competitive. So if that same kind of, speed transfers over, looking at track history at those 2 tracks and say, well, he was good here last year. I don't predict that Ross Chastain's going to be there, at least show that kind of speed. Now, if he unloads fast, certainly we can go ahead and back Chastain at, 7, 8-1, but 9-1. When has he qualified well? He hasn't done that either. So no reason to rush Chastain. I'm not saying go fade him across the board at all, but I still think overvalued, just in general. Just not super high on him. I don't know. What have you seen on Chastain that just warrants a rush to the window to bet him to win the race at least?
Nothing. We've talked about it. He has consistently been an 8th to 12th place car. I mean,
exactly.
And he's being priced like he is supposed to be a top 5 car this weekend. And look, there's a very good chance that he catches lightning in a bottle and somehow puts together a run and can run it up inside the podium. But there's nothing that I've seen pre-week wise that leads me to believe he's someone that I have to factor in to my betting card until I see him unload quickly and think he's got race-winning speed. So for people that wanted to avoid him in the outright market or even fade him for the handful of shops that do put up pre-week matchups, would have no qualms about doing so whatsoever, knowing that you were backing elite drivers at pretty favorable prices before Chastain potentially could unload like a donkey. And if he does have a rocket ship, then you can always reverse course and bet him at a decent price.
Yeah, and I'm not afraid to back him at 7 if he looks good, right? This is, you're not giving up that much, win equity, 9-1 to 7-1. At least he's going to be fast. He's going to be in the game, because last year, if you were fast in practice, you were fast in the race. This is not one of those places where someone just randomly disappeared after looking strong in practice. So usually, because this is such a unique track, it is this 1.33 concrete track, setups do matter, and cars that unload fast typically race well the whole weekend. This is not like Denny Hamlin at Kansas, where he just runs well there week in and week out, or Denny Hamlin at Vegas, where they just kind of figure it out, or Kyle Larson at Homestead, where it doesn't matter how he looks, 20 or 30 laps in, he's going to be the fastest guy. That's not the case here. This is a very much a one-off. It's not the 1.5 mile. It is concrete, which we don't see other than Dover in Bristol. And I'm okay to back Chastain at 7-1 or even 6-1 if he puts it in the pole and puts himself in position to win after practicing well. So that's why I'm waiting on him at that 9-1 price.
I'll call it tier 2, but it's more like tier 1.5 this week, with a couple of drivers that are more than capable of pricing that 10-1 to 12-1 range. And that grouping will include Ryan Blaney, William Byron, and Tyler Reddick. When we look at Ryan Blaney, kind of been feast or famine for him. Werme over the last 6 races has a race win and a 7th place finish, 4 finishes, 24th or worse, running out of gas at Gateway, getting dive bombed by Michael McDowell. Suddenly we're talking about 4 out of those 6 races being very good finishes with a bit of good luck. But he's only led a grand total of 345 laps so far this season, and 201 of them came in one race when he grabbed the checkered flag at Iowa. When we look at Dover, was inside the top 10 from a total speed ranking standpoint, but hasn't been great when it comes to 1.5-mile tracks. As we know, the Fords have kind of struggled a little bit more than we anticipated, even for all the gains that they've made on shorter, flatter tracks. When we go to William Byron, hasn't led a lap in the last 4 races overall. We talked about his level of consistency. Quite frankly, hasn't really been there of late, but he was good at Dover, 7th in average speed, outside the top 5 this year on intermediate tracks when you look at his overall speed profile. And as far as the next-gen history at Nashville, he's had good finishes there, but some of the underlying numbers don't necessarily support that as far as his total speed, his driver rating, or where he's been from an average running position. And then, of course, Tyler Reddick. 4 or 5 races, he's gone 8th or better, kind of doing it quietly. An average finish over the last 5 races, better than 9th. 4th in total speed at Dover, 3rd best average speed if you include Dover and the intermediates, kind of throwing them in the same bucket. But in Nashville, 10th driver rating, and doesn't really register in a lot of other key categories, with an 18th place finish in 2022 and a 30th place finish last year. So when you look at those 3 guys, Byron, Reddick, and Blaney, anybody that stands out to you, or drivers that you may be itching to fade early on in the week?
I think let's start with Reddick. I don't hate this price. He did have a great car here last year, lost the wheel. Hard to tell how he would have fared after the sunset, because this was, I think he lost the tire after a green flag stop, and it was shuffled back and never really saw, any sort of competitive racing again. Not that he may have gotten back on the lead lap. I'm not quite sure, but he just wasn't in that top 5 racing for the lead where he was at the start of the race. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how he unloads. He did unload very fast last year. 12-1. I know there were a lot of people that were high on him. Again, just not a name we've seen passing cars. And in the past, we've seen Reddick on road course dominate, or maybe some high tire wear tracks where he's running the high line, where he's passing race cars. Just seems like kind of humming along, which, short flat tracks are not his forte. And this is not a high banking track. especially compared to some of the other intermediates that we're talking about, or Dover for that matter. So again, I don't see him going out there and putting it on the pole. 12 is probably the best price of these three, just because of the way he looked last year and how he looked in practice, and how he was able to back it up for a while there in qualifying, and then also the race. William Byron, I think I'm responsible for this by saying he's the next Jimmy Johnson. I hate to.
It's a tough cross to bear, Wormser.
Oh,
it is a tough cross to bear.
The minute I disagree with the guys at Door Bumper Clear when they read my question and they said, well, he's not Jimmy Johnson. It's like, well, no shit, he's not Jimmy Johnson, but he's the most Jimmy Johnson next. We haven't seen him go out there and lead laps since then. So I hate to jinx the guy. Personally, I hate that I'm affecting his well-being. Not that William Byron's hurting. He's got Legos for days. But we just had not seen.
I'm sure he hangs on every word that you mutter poorly about
him. Yeah, I know.
And
he's just waiting for this Stay Green episode to drop just to hear how he's going to fare this week. But
a lot of people do in the NASCAR community. So, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah. But I'm not high on Byron. What have we seen out of this guy in the last few weeks, other than, he had a second place at Iowa, but he wasn't as fast as Elliott. He wasn't as fast as, Kyle Larson, not even close. And he wasn't as fast as Chris Bell. So he's probably should be in that 10 or 12 to 1 range. He's the third fastest Hendrick car now, I would say. Before, it was quite easy to say it was Larson, Byron, Chase, Bowman. And now it's clearly Larson, Chase, Byron, Bowman. So we've seen that switch up a little bit. And then Ryan Blaney, man, I don't know. I could go either way on this guy. I see a 10 to 1 price on Blaney. We've seen Blaney be good everywhere when he unloads fast. I know that seems like a no shit, but there's guys that unload fast and still can't race a racetrack and figure out a way to get a win. But when Blaney found speed last year in the playoffs, he found it at Vegas, he found it at Homestead, he found it at Martinsville, he found it at Phoenix. It was every type of racing that we run across. Oh, you found it at Talladega. So, I'm certainly not a guy that I want to rush to fade just because.
He also had Team Penske put all of their resources into the 12 car for those races that you mentioned.
You know what? That's a good point. And there's a little rumor going around that Team Penske is pouring all of their resources into that 22 team, which makes a lot of sense. So I'm not high on Blaney. I would, if I had to lean, I would lean more fade. To only finish 2 of the 3 races that they've been here, I mean, that's not a good track history at all. And I know that he was running kind of top 5 when the issue happened last year, but you still got to finish races. Ask Kyle Busch what it's like to finish races. I can't imagine that he's singing the praises of DNFs or DFLs, if you will. I want to wait and see on Blaney. He ain't going to open it. He ain't going to open as the 4 to 1 favorite. So
no.
You're not missing out on 10 to 1. If anything, maybe some value betting against him just because, he does have a win at Iowa, but maybe 3rd or 4th place car just stayed out of trouble. Could not stay out of trouble last week at Loudon. Found himself getting collected in what was the most predictable wreck I've ever seen in my life. I did a little live stream for the last 80 laps, and I saw Michael McDowell on the inside of row 1.
You knew what was coming when you lined up.
Better get clear, buddy.
You knew it was coming.
There is no chance that this 34 is going to make turn 1, and it was just plowing through, and just Blaney at least handled it well. I don't know that I would have. I understand where McDowell is coming from, but when he came on the radio and said he would not be able to sleep at night if he didn't go for it, it's like if you don't wreck, like that.
Yeah, somewhere along the way, saying. Michael McDowell, just try and drive your way into the top 2 and then take that dive bomb when they wave the white flag. Don't dive bomb and take yourself out of the race with 50 laps to go.
Well, he was going to do it
just
for
here.
Place.
You've done it multiple times so far this season.
Yeah, and do it for the win. Don't do it to just fall in behind Bell, who you're not going to run down on the long run anyway. Like, you have to get a good restart. Like, at least last another restart. So maybe you can Bell spins his tires. So we could talk about McDowell's mistake forever. Ultimately, Blaney gets caught up in it, and yes, he did win Iowa. Was he the third, maybe the fourth fastest car? Yeah. So if you think the third or fourth best car is going to win and you like that 10-1 price, by all means, fire away right now.
What a long-winded way to get to an answer there. Brevity, apparently not your strong suit when you were in an academic environment back in the day. We'll keep that in mind when we limit you to word counts going forward. Tier 3, Joey Logano, as low as 18-1, upwards of 25-1 if you shop around there. Ty Gibbs, upwards of 20-1, as low as 16-1 I've seen. Brad K, more or less in that low 20 range. Christopher Buescher in that 35 to 40 range. And Worm, what podcast would this be if I didn't at least mention Kyle Busch as a polarizing number? 50-1 at some shops, 35-1 elsewhere, kind of falling in that no man's land. So as far as tier 3 is concerned, drivers that you feel might be undervalued, drivers that are priced just right, and drivers I'm sure that you want no part of in some capacity.
All right. I might catch a little flack for this one, but I did nibble a little Logano at 20. Hear me out, everyone, before you just change the station. He's a great qualifier here. And the next gen car,
he's a great qualifier most spots at mile and a half. The Fords, whatever they do from an air pressure standpoint, it is phenomenal at mile and a half. Now, what happens 8 laps into a run? A little bit of a different story.
Yeah, leaves a little bit to be desired, but he has an average starting spot. When I say history here, I'm only including the 2 races in the next gen car. Average starting spot of 3.0, which is phenomenal. Now, he only has 1 top 10, but Logano is one of those guys that I don't really care how he looks in practice. If he figures out a way to get in the top 5 when it comes to qualifying, he's going to hang around, and he just kind of figures it out. You couple that with the fact that, we have good information saying that Penske is designating more resources to that 22 team. I took a little shot. Now, it was a very tiny shot, albeit, but I do like having Logano in my corner. There's, we have 2 guys so far this week that we've nibbled, and that was Hamlin and Logano. And I love having those guys because for whatever reason, you're going to get the best finish. Now, Denny is going to take maybe a 10% win proposition and try to drive it in there and say it's a 50-50 chance. And I want that out of the guy. I'm not backing him in matchups yet. I'm backing him to win the race. So it's checkers or wreckers. And to be honest, Denny gets you paid. So I'm okay with taking a guy like Denny at 8. And then also this, and I like him over 6-1. So if you see plus 650 somewhere, it's out there. I don't hate that at all. And then also Logano, it was a very small piece, but he qualifies well here. He's run well here in the Xfinity Series. He's led a lot of laps. And although he doesn't have the finishes this year, I do think that resources matter. We saw it happen last year when we've seen it with Penske the last 2 years. We have seen when they've designated resource to one particular team, they've figured it out and they've won back-to-back championships. So, they might be struggling right now, but when they focus, they're able to get it done. So this is not an endorsement to fire on Logano across the board. We're not ladder betting him top 3, top 5, top 10. This is just, hey, to win the race, I do think that Logano's kind of in that mode. Like, I have to win, especially if you look at some of the tracks we have coming up. We could get a random winner, which is just going to decrease the amount of people that can point their way in. And I like Logano. So I'm going to stop trying to justify my Logano bet at this point and move on to Ty Gibbs. Another guy that I do think has a decent price for the speed in the race car. Clearly the 4th fastest Gibbs car, but he's getting bettable. There's obviously speed in Toyota, and we're done seeing him in that 12-1 range, which was just making me sick. And to see people back him at 12-1, it's like, whoa. This guy's not a 12-1 type driver yet. Will he be?
It's like backing Ludwig Aubert to win a golf tournament at 14.
Wow. just an unsolicited fire from the top rope. All the guy can do is he hasn't even been on the PGA Tour for a year. He's competed in two majors.
He's being priced like Ty Gibbs.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. So I do think if someone came to me and said that they had a hunch on Ty Gibbs, now I don't know that although I do like where he's priced in the outright market, I have not bet him. But there might be some matchups where, if he does run that 7th to 10th or 7th to 12th, you might be able to find some good matchup value. But outright market, better, but still not quite there yet on this particular track. If we get to a full 1.5 miles, I think I might trust him a little bit more, but not quite at this 1.33, one-off concrete track. Then if we go ahead and look at RFK, gosh, if it was a cookie cutter, 1.5 mile track, I think that these guys would be pounders at this price. But boy, these short flats, they have not been good. And if you're looking at momentum, they have absolutely none.
Busher got a little bit more than Keselowski.
Busher did, but that was in the rain.
Sure.
I would say that was not a dry scenario. If we want to look at, let me pull up let's see, this is this year. We're looking at guys this year at Dover. Brad Kay started 24th, finished 30th. Not good. I don't remember specifically what happened to him. Where is Busher on here? Started 18th, finished 17th, driver rating of 71. Leaves a little bit to be desired. I think that you have to look at RFK when we go back to whether a high tire wear or even just a regular 1.5 miles. I think that's where these guys really do excel. Maybe you can look at Chris Busher to road course, but I don't know that Chris should ever be 40-1. So, and Brad probably should never be 25-1. So if you just want to steal a number on these guys, I don't hate it. Because we could see a massive change in price if these guys qualify in the top 10. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. I guess that means they're probably properly priced, but I don't mind a flyer on either one of them.
Kyle Busch.
Does that even make sense? Oh,
yeah,
Kyle Busch.
It made a little bit of sense. I mean, only because I've been doing this with you for more than 10 years. So
I
got it, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going, what the hell is he talking about? That made zero sense. And it reminds me of the scene in in Billy Madison.
We're all dumber.
We are now all dumber for having heard that. Okay. Kyle Busch, last but not least, or anybody else you want to touch on in tier 3?
Well, Kyle was good on concrete at Dover, and by good, I mean he ran in the top 10.
1.5 miles are better for RCR than short tracks have been.
Yeah, he's a guy that. Gosh,
no, he's a guy. That's about right. You got that right. He's a guy so far.
That's
it.
Season. That's all I have. I don't have. You tell me on Kyle Busch. I don't know. You want to like him, and I've seen a few tweets that guys that do like Kyle Busch, and
if things are going to go well for Kyle, my take is you're not running to bet him top 10 because he's not just going to settle for a top 10.
Exactly.
That
it's a top 5.
That does him absolutely no good right now. So if you're going to bet Kyle and you want to diversify your portfolio, so to speak, before he unloads, I would say break up whatever you feel comfortable with, a part of a position with a win price, a top 3 and a top 5. If he runs well in a top 5, you get paid. If he runs really well and gets you a podium finish, you get paid. And then if he happens to win the race, you hit the bonanza.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe avoid him in matchups. Just because it's
not a guy that I'm betting
checkers or wreckers, but you're at least getting properly paid. Because if he's back there with the squirrels, he ain't finishing the race. He's done such a great job of just not finishing. It's shocking. So I think you hit the nail on the head there. That you make sure you get paid properly. Top 10 does him no good. So listen to Todd on that. I think that was really sound advice when it comes to betting Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I'm with you, though, in terms of matchups. Not a guy I'm going to bet in matchups or even be willing to lay a price with. He's kind of the antithesis of Chase Elliott, where you can feel confident that even on a bad day, Chase ain't going to take himself out of the race. He can beat some good cars if he happens to show speed and finish with a top 5. Kyle would not be that guy.
That's
again, you can follow Chris on Twitter as we wave the green, white checkered flag on stage 2 at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. Follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Worm, stage 3 today is going to be shortened by rain, so we'll be a little bit more succinct as we break things down. And we kind of tease it at the top of the show. Sometimes you make the right handicap and the gambling gods laugh at all your best laid plans. And at other times they reward you for your convictions, even if the handicap was incorrect. And last week at Loudon probably fell into the latter bucket.
Ooh.
As we bet Christopher Bell outright. Look, if all things being equal, I don't think he wins that race, but that's neither here nor there. I want to focus on Martin Truex Jr., who we faded with Christopher Bell as a best bet on this podcast last week. We personally took a little bit of Kyle Larson to grab a price. I know you talked about it at great lengths on the pre-race poll, but from watching that race, Martin Truex doesn't get himself into trouble on pit road,
Correct.
Doesn't get himself into a little bit of dust up with the squirrels. The 19 is a significantly better car than the way we evaluated him coming into the weekend.
Yeah, and I think that's why I always have said that the explanation is more important than the bet. And my explanation was that Martin Truex Jr. was struggling coming into this race relative to the 2 years prior when he was much faster. He was competitive at places like Texas, Kansas, Dover, even winning at Dover leading up to this race last year. And then we had not seen that same kind of speed surrounding him or just in that team. Throw in the fact that, the retirement was coming. And I made an assumption that, hey, this guy's kind of cashing it in. He was terrible at Iowa. We brought the same package to a place that I thought was going to race similarly to Iowa. And I was flat out wrong. And it's important to point this out and have a very objective, analysis, because it's really easy to win those bets and through confirmation bias, just go, well, yeah, Truex has struggled. We've seen the struggles, and that's not why he struggled on the right rear and had a 25-second stop and then got. You
didn't handicap that? That's not what you handicapped. You built that into your
I
modeling.
built that into my model. I built in one slow pit stop right before a 3-hour rain delay. I built that into the model. And, sometimes you get it wrong, and you have to sit back and just say, hey, I can't do that again. We've said this before. I think, Todd, you said it. We're focusing on the system, not the outcome. And if you're going to sit back and really try to do this right, you have to be critical. And I was wrong. And there's certain tracks, and Loudon now will fall into a track where if the track history is there, I don't care where guys have been running, as long as they show race winning speed, at least in clean air. It doesn't need to be, they don't need to have the top, they don't need to have the top 10 fastest laps. They just need to show speed. And Joe Gibbs has the speed, and Martin Truex Jr. or a guy like him. I know that he's retiring, so this is going to be null and void next year, but looking forward, I'm not going to fade Chris Bell. I don't care how shitty he looks leading up to Loudon next year. That is a no fade guy. And I did catch a little bit of crap on the pre-race poll saying, if you're going to fade someone, you fade Martin Truex Jr. Guys are saying that's blasphemy. And I'm like, listen, I'm the pro, you're not. And this is what I'm doing. And I got to sit back and eat some crow and say, hey, I got this wrong. And there's just certain places where there is a rhythm, where there, Martinsville could fall into that. It's not a place where you want to go fade Denny Hamlin. Not that he's, perfect there all the time, but you could throw Loudon in there. You could even throw maybe Richmond in that category of tracks where it's very rhythm based, where there's a little bit of tire fall off, and from laps, 30 to 50, the cream truly does rise. And it doesn't matter how they look in practice. It doesn't matter how they look in qualifying. And it certainly doesn't matter how they look in the previous 6 races leading up to that track. So happy to win. And I think long run, we probably get more unlucky than we do get lucky. So I am going to happily cash these tickets. And for our best bet standpoint, it worked out great. It is nice to see us kind of really happily in the green this year on that. We were kind of hovering right around the 50% mark, but now we're significantly up on the best bet. So I'm happy about that, but I gotta be completely honest that I read that wrong. And I will not use that same handicapping strategy at Loudon next year. It might work at other tracks, but not necessarily Loudon.
I also think it's important, too, when we talk about pricing, playing a role in everything we do. I mean, we can feel a driver should be a favorite, but there's a big difference between taking an underdog at plus 140 or betting into a particular matchup at Pick'em. Yes, Christopher Bell, when we recommended that wager against Truex, was minus $1.25. That number reopened despite there being no practice at minus 180. You saw money on Martin Truex, and you can understand why people were taking that price. It looked like they were going to be rewarded given some of that track history. But on the flip side, I mean, I told you a driver that I thought I wanted to fade based on the way he was being priced with no practice was Chase Elliott. Well, I did that in one particular matchup with Joey Logano, took a price, didn't quite work out. Joey was probably the better car. He gets mixed up. So this stuff balances out. And I think it's also why when you're doing this, like the way we do as professionals, and even for some folks that are just dipping their toes into the NASCAR water, is that there are going to be ebbs and flows, and it's about taking numbers and looking at the macro, not getting blinded by the micro when you're doing this all the time. And some races, look, things aren't going to break your way. Some races they do, and with good money management at the end of the season, you're not looking at a one-race sample size to determine your merits as a handicapper. You're looking over the course of a full 36-race sample size, where there's some races that are going to be great, some races that are going to be piss poor, but as long as you end the season in the black, that is the name of the game. And the same thing applies for those folks who are about to get themselves in a football mode and get too high or too low based on one Sunday's results in the NFL or one particular Saturday's results in college football. But with all of that being said, we are back to that best bet portion of the program. And I'm kind of curious to hear where you want to take us in terms of pre-week matchups, top 3, top 5, top 10s, or putting your hot hand to the fire when it comes to an outright market, as you tipped your hand last week on Christopher Bell. I know you said and divulged to our audience that we do have some Denny Hamlin exposure in the outright market. So the floor is yours, kind sir.
Yeah, I can't decide if I want to. If we beat the market, we beat the market, but it's been a bad bet. Like we beat the market with Chris Bell at minus $1.25. That closed, I don't know, minus 160 or minus 170. So we could have gotten out of the bet. I still liked it. And then we saw a couple weeks ago with, at Sonoma, where we had this terrible Chris Buescher number that ends up cashing when you could have gotten, almost twice as good a number had you waited. I'm going to stick with a little bit of a juicier matchup for the best bet. I am going to stick with Kyle Larson minus 150 over Ross Chastain. That's at Superbook. I just think Hot Slick favors Kyle Larson. We've seen him run exceptionally well at Dover earlier in the year, finishing second behind Denny Hamlin. He also started 21st. So it wasn't one of those things where he just kind of maintained in the top 5. He had to drive to the front. The second best driver rating that day at 120. I do think that that's a great track comp. If you look at last year with Kyle Larson, I think he finished 5th. He just passed William Byron late. The only reason I know that is I had Byron over Larson in that matchup. But in the daytime, we saw back, I know before the next gen era, Kyle Larson kind of dominated this race in the past. So I do think this is a good track for him. I think that this team is firing on all cylinders. I think Larson week in and week out has to be the guy to beat. And I do think that, that being said, probably the same this week. And I will say that Ross Chastain's overvalued. I know that he has a good history here, but he also had a good history at Dover and Darlington, and we saw him struggle there. So Kyle Larson minus 150 over Ross Chastain, and that is at Superbook.
All righty. Kyle Larson it is. We put our blind faith and trust in the 5 car to go out there and make things happen before we know how these cars will look come Sunday afternoon. Fine work as always, Wormser. Pre-race poll. You can do that 2 hours before green flag. What time does that make for us on Sunday?
It'll be 1:30 Eastern and 10:30 Pacific. How about that? Me getting that real quick.
Yeah, you're getting good with the time zones. You don't have to use your fingers anymore.
Yeah.
I don't see the hamster falling off his wheel for the visual that I get as we record this show. And more importantly, it means you get to have a cocktail before noon on the West Coast, which I know is something that you enjoy quite a bit with your lovely Canadian cider. Yes. That is your go-to beverage of choice. So best of luck to all of you, our loyal Stay Green listeners. As always, encourage you guys to rate, review, subscribe to the Bet the Board podcast and everything we do around these parts. Go to your favorite podcast platform, offer up a 5-star review. It goes a long way towards helping new listeners find us for some of the best information, not just in NASCAR, but also in college football and the soon-to-be NFL preview podcasts, which are scheduled to drop in early August. But most importantly, with a head-to-head matchup, ticket in hand on Kyle Larson over Ross Chastain in pocket come Sunday afternoon. We'll see you at the window, and hopefully we'll have some additional best bet content to offer up on the website, assuming Mother Nature complies and we get a full practice session on Saturday. Best of luck this weekend with all your investments.